I think we can get started. Welcome everybody to this very first session of the Economist Week 2022. Let me very briefly introduce myself. I'm Michel van der Wel. I'm the Vice Dean Education at the Erasmus School of Economics. And yeah, it's an honor to be here, to be invited here to open. And I think the week looks fantastic, not only in terms of weather, but also in terms of activities. Also a lot of students watching at home, also very welcome, of course. Now, given the time, without further ado, let me introduce the keynote speaker that we have right now. It's Mr. Herman Mulder. I've received the CV, and of course, I was aware of who you are, and it's such a long list that I think I'm just going to be short to give you as much time as possible to do your talk. I think if I can summarize, then I think you were doing sustainable finance before sustainable finance was cool and the topic that it is today. I think that hopefully that gives you enough credit among the work that you're doing today, as it's also given there. You're the chair of the Impact Economy Foundation, also with strong links to our university. It's a great honor to have you on our campus. The floor is yours. Good luck.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to congratulate the board of AEclipse to organize not only this session here today with myself and Dennis, of course, and Dennis Kerkhoff, who will come here after, but also the rest of the week, and I will be back on Wednesday because we have a panel discussion which will be very interactive. Well, we all realize these are testing times. I think you must open your newspaper or the television or wherever you were looking at this. The testing times are really something we should be concerned about. The theme of my contribution today is look through the cycle. We can be bogged down by misery of other people or even our own misery of today. Ukraine is, of course, on top of our minds. I think we have to recognize that. If you look in the broader context, what's happening right now is not abnormal. It is abnormal, but it's not that abnormal. So my message today to you is my own career starting in 1972 to today. A crisis is a normal thing. You will, in your career in the next decade, I hope, you will be faced as a professional, also with volatility, with crises. And the lesson I have learned, and the message I would like to give to you is your next 50 years. Look through this cycle and strive for better and be the leader of that. I think that's my message, which is a positive message. I'm an avid student of the history of crises. I was just mentioning to Julian, I have a good friend of mine who is a professor in Maastricht, and his theme as a professor is spectacular and brilliant failures. I think it's a wonderful subject because if you look at failures or crises, you can learn a lot of it. I think the problem with crisis is that we are rarely prepared for it. And you all remember 2 years ago when COVID-19 started. I still remember I was talking to my wife. We were in the early days, that was about 2 years ago, 12th of March, it became the pandemic. We were washing every single orange because we didn't know what it was we were faced with. And now 2 years later, we think we are in control. So when the crisis hits, we often are not prepared, we're not resilient, and we have big question mark what's happening. The same as with Ukraine. I keep already for many years notes, I call them snippets. Every day I read my newspapers, I read my mails, and I make notes. So I have a whole history of my own notes for the last 4 or 5 years. What's happening in the world around me. And many of you have lucid ideas in the middle of the night. And then when you wake up in the morning thereafter, say, what was the brilliant idea I had? And you forgot. Same with dreams. So I have a discipline to say, I'm going to record that because I know that it's much better that thinking back, reading back what I wrote 4 years ago, what I picked up, it is very interesting. So I was looking, for instance, at Ukraine. It only started in November last year that we were starting to get a little bit concerned, and now it gets out of hand. We are, as human beings, very inept to see the signs on the wall, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's Ukraine or anything else. I would say there's going to be a debt crisis in some of the developing countries later this year. We'll discuss it later. But we are very inept to anticipate crises, let alone to prepare for it. We are so well equipped, once the shit hits the fan, to be able to explain why it happened. We're brilliant, in particular economists are brilliant to really say it was inevitable, but we didn't see it before. That's something which is fascinating. And then what happens? Then the regulators and even we ourselves are going to take a lot of measures and steps to prevent the previous crisis, to the one which we just got out of, to reoccur, forgetting that there will be a new crisis. In my 50 years of professional career, I've seen many of those. I've seen many bulls who are nearsighted, by the way, and I've seen many bears. And don't look the bear in the eye, because you know he becomes aggressive. So I profile myself as a green swan, and I'm honest. I borrowed that from John Elkington, a good friend of mine, who coined People, Planet, Profit in 1994. Green swans. Don't believe the bulls and the bears. They are not sustainable. We have too long a bull already. It's time for the bear to come back, but we don't want the bear either. We don't want the Russian. We may want to have a Canadian bear, but not a Russian bear. We have two bears right now. But coming back to crises, I think what we realize is, during all those, what I realized with my notes with a career of 50 years, that we see every time something goes wrong. And our response is first panic, then it's want to control it, and we forget there is going to be something new. So my message here is, for you now, for me in the past, for you in the future, look through the cycle. And that has to do with values, that has to do with principles, that has to do with beliefs. That's where the Sustainable Development Goals are one of those beliefs, or one of those frameworks, which we should use to say, all right, the crisis is there, we have survived it, we didn't resolve it, but let's learn from it. Let's learn from it and do something better with it. Cut the dead wood. Create new models. And my other theme is, apart from here, look through the cycle, anticipate more crises, read the signs on the wall, is that we need to redefine our economy. We need to redefine the way we behave as a producer of products. We need to behave our consumer behavior. We need to behave to improve our regulatory instincts. My theme is, we need to define true profit, true price, which the sum of it will become the true value of business. That's what the Impact Economy Foundation is doing. You may have heard true price, true pricing, trueprice.org is the website. We have been created 10 years ago. By the way, all the employees of True Price and Impact Institute, the sister company, about 50, are just a little bit older than you are. It's fascinating for me as a boomer, to work with people like you who say, well, we're going to do it differently. We have values, we have ideas, and we want to put it into practice. That's a big issue, of course. If you have an idea, how do you put it into practice? How do you make it work? So Impact Institute, which is working on true profit, True Price, which is working on true price, together creating true value for business. We are a movement. Your generation, we are a movement. As a professional, as a consumer, as someone who is in a professional organization on the supply side, how are we going to change the way we work, we live, and we operate? So I'm a blooming boomer. But if you look in my career, for 25 years, I was as black as possible. I completely missed the point, at least the point of today. Because I started in 1972, which was 1 year before the oil crisis. And my world was Milton Friedman, the social purpose of a business to make a profit, and Modigliani Miller, which basically says the value of a company is independent from its financing structure, which means leveraging the company by debt with interest deductibility is fine. So the business of banking is lending. So those were the gurus, those were the Nobel Prize winners in the 70s. We had the addiction to oil, which came in 1972 with the first oil shock. The oil price went from $4 a barrel to $12 a barrel. That was a huge jump, which created stagflation in the 70s. Then we had the second oil shock in 1979, the Iranian Revolution, and that increased the oil price to $40 a barrel. The world was in crisis. Not only, it was not military necessarily, it was a social crisis, it was an economic crisis. Interest rates in the US at the end of 1979, 1980, but 20%. 20% interest. And it was Volcker, the then chair of the Fed, who put the brakes on interest. He increased interest significantly higher to reduce the expectation that inflation would go even higher. Because that's the problem with inflation. If everyone anticipates that inflation goes up, you start to buy more now. So you increase the bottlenecks in the economy. Trade unions are going to say, well, if that's going to happen, we want to have higher wages. So you get a wage price spiral, which becomes uncontrollable. So what Volcker did in 1980 was put the brakes on inflation by raising the interest to 20%, which created a problem. But it was necessary. So if you look at my period in the oil industry, until in the oil industry, it was, the first 25 years was very much dominated by oil and money. It was not sustainability. It wasn't there. Climate became only an issue, a real issue in 1997. So in the first 25 years of my 50 years of professional career, sustainability was not an issue. How come that it became an issue? How come it that you want to be here to learn more about sustainability? How and what is going to happen in the next 25 years? And that's what I would like to discuss with you. Are we going here? Where did I come from? Where are we here? And where are we going to? I had a wake-up call, and you will have wake-up calls in your career as well at some point in time. That was in 1998. In 1998, I was faced with, just appointed the Director General of Risk Management in ABN Bank. We received a letter from NGOs. The NGOs were complaining about the bank lending to a gold copper mine in West Irion. And they said, this mine is a disaster. Environmentally, socially, it's corrupt. You should not be there as a bank. And that letter was supported by 800 signatories from clients, 1998. And so I received the NGO and the Milieudefensie and received the letter, and of course what was the intention? We're going to inspect the issue, we're going to dilute the issue, we send them back into the forest, as we say in Dutch. Nevertheless, I asked my colleague, country manager in Indonesia, he said, well, have a look. So he went physically to West Irion. He came back and said, Herman, they're absolutely right. The project was financially perfect for us, for the bank and for the mining company. But it was an environmental and social disaster, and it was corrupt. So we came back to Chancellor and they say, well, listen, you have taught us something which we hadn't realized. Because my world was Milton Friedman, Modigliani and Miller, financial economy. Nothing to do with environmental capital, social capital, human capital, all the capitals you may have heard of. So That was my wake-up call. There is more than just the financial economy. There's nature, there are people, there are ethical issues to be addressed. So that was my wake-up call, and then I became greener. 5 years later, being the chair of the Group Risk Committee in ABN AMRO Bank, we had a proposal from my colleagues in business, where they to finance an oil project in Venezuela with heavy oil. Again, heavy oil, not anymore, but in those days we said that was in 2002. And I said, as the chair of the Risk Committee, I want to have an independent environmental assessment study. Independent, not by Chevron, independent. Citibank was prepared to do it on the basis of the information of Chevron. I said, we're not going to do that. We want to have an independent assessment. And we lost the deal. So I had a problem, because if you're the chair of a Group Risk Committee, you need to be independent, you need to be balanced. You cannot be an activist who's pushing the sustainability agenda at the cost of the income of the bank. I mean, that was the criticism I got. I happened to have a meeting with a lunch with Peter Voigt, the then CEO of IFC. And I said, Peter, I have a problem. I know that I'm right, but the competition is not doing what I would like them to do. And Peter said, I have a problem too. I'm IFC, part of the World Bank. I'm small, you're this big. Can we do something together? So we invited the 12 leading project finance banks, talking about 2002, only 20, well, as much as 20 years ago. The 12 largest project finance banks, I mean, Deutsche Bank, Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan, you name it. We invited all of the front office, all of the front officers of those banks in project finance. You may have a problem with trade unions, community organizations, NGOs. Can you come with one case? And let's discuss that. So that's what we did in October 2002. The largest players came together, and we had 12 cases in the morning, and then we suddenly realized we had the same problem. So 12 months later, we had the Equator Principles. That was the first agreement, voluntary agreement between leading practitioners to work together on raising the bar of social, environmental, and ethical issues. No government was involved. No regulatory supervisor was involved. It was just us as practitioners who said, we have to do better. Now, that was published. That was adhered to. And the Equator Principles got out of hand. I mean, 200 banks were supporting it. There are since then a lot of new agreements, but that was the first time that the industry itself said we can do better. Now, if you look at the financial sector right now, in the last couple of years, it is highly regulated. If you have friends in the banking sector, and my wife is still working in the banking sector, they are suffocating because the regulatory oversight is becoming a cultural issue. The financial sector did a lot of things wrong, leading to the great financial crisis in 2008. So post GFC, 2008, 2009, you got a lot of regulatory interventions. In Dutch, poortwachter, money laundering, certain area. I mean, supervisors were looking at the culture and the conduct in an organization. The supervisory position was much stronger than it was before. On top of that comes the climate agenda, and now the biodiversity agenda. So just imagine, sitting in the banking sector, and you look at the compliance function, you become an administrator. You become an official, a government official indirectly, because your role is completely regulated by all the misery which the banking sector and the economy and society has gone through, And that, I think, is a disservice. So at the end of my contribution here, you may ask me, what would I want? What is your advice for my career? Well, my view is buying low and selling high. I would encourage any one of you, what you want to do is, don't forget the financial sector as an option, despite the fact, and Dennis will say more about it, how you can create value in a creative way, in a new way, which is fit for purpose for the future. Don't forget the financial sector, despite the fact that you hear from some of your friends or family members say, I don't go to the banking sector or the pension sector or the insurance sector because it's suffocating, and that's what my wife keeps telling me, but she's much older, so she will step out in 2 years. She can. But the financial sector, I think, is a very interesting area, and I hope that Dennis will explain that later when we're going to discuss more practically. But coming back to my story, so the sustainability movement really started 35 years ago. It was Gro Brundtland who was leading the sustainability movement in 1987 by saying sustainability. She was the Prime Minister of Norway. There was a committee, and the committee came with a report. Sustainability is making sure that development is equal to current generations enjoying their life without compromising the future of future generations. In a sense, what it was saying, we are borrowing natural assets, human assets, social cohesion, anything we do here, we're borrowing that from our children and grandchildren. That's pretty powerful. So we have a duty as professionals, that we render what we got from our parents, we render that to our children, at least as good or bad, and then we have to regenerate as we did it. We cannot deplete resources. We cannot pollute the air, or we cannot pollute the soil. We have to leave the earth. When I'm retiring eventually, I must be convinced that I left the world for my grandchildren. I ate better than I received it. So the sustainability movement started in 1987. And when you read my speech, I have a lot of details in the speech where you can see, but the movement started to work. Only 35 years ago, and for me it was only in 1998, so it's only 25 years ago. Before that I was black as possible, and now I think I'm a little bit of a green swan. 2015 was the marquee year, not because it was the election of Mr. Trump, because that was the beginning of the disaster, but 2015 is a marquee year because it really was a year that we had the Paris Agreement, of course. In November, we had the Sustainable Development Goals in New York. And we had also before that the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which created a discipline and international agreements on financing flows as support mechanism for positive development. So 2015 was I would say, the big year where sustainable development became really high on the agenda of everyone. It was an inclusive process, and this university here is really full of SDGs. Bob van Tulder and many other professors here, Dirk Schoenmaker, Karen Maas, they walk and think and act with the Sustainable Development Goals. So 2015 was a marquee year for us in sustainable development, because it's the first global agenda, which is an opportunity agenda. John Elkington, I mentioned him before, said and Mariana Mazzucato also, they say it's a moonshot for business. So it's an opportunity agenda. And I think with all the ESG, do no harm primacy right now by regulators, the SDGs offer a doing good and well agenda to create that better world which you want to work in, and I don't, and should, and Dennis and I agree with that. We want our legacy to be that we are reaching the SDGs, and even more importantly, because the SDGs are until 2030, that we're also going to create a follow-up of the SDGs. And that's my appeal to you. The SDGs are finished by 2030. We need to start drafting the next agenda. There are a lot of net zero commitments after Glasgow, a lot of net zero emissions, zero waste, but we need to think more deeply. Those are just implementation issues. We have to think in terms of justice, in terms of fairness, in terms of values. What is driving us from now, with the lessons of COVID-19, with the lessons of Ukraine, how are we going to shape the future for the next 25 years? And that thought process, that action process is already starting. So whatever you are going to do professionally, or even more important, next to your job, think of 25, 30 years ahead. What are the fundamental values which you want your life, your children, your organization where you want to work to look like? And I bet you true price, true profit, and true value will be very much part of that. I've lived the worst of times and the best of times. The best of times is definitely 2015 SDGs, because it really created a perspective. The worst of times, whether it was the Cuba crisis, which was very close to a nuclear war, or the oil crisis in the 70s, we have been there before. So as depressing the media may be right now in Ukraine, nobody knows what's going to happen. There will be I wouldn't say a morning after, because usually that's with a headache, but an afternoon after, to say, all right, we recovered, we have a new start. The SDGs are today even more important. It goes back to, we have a plan, it's a global plan, it's universal, it's very specific, and it's very comprehensive. There's only one thing in the SDGs which is totally wrong, because it talks about GDP growth. And we don't want GDP growth the traditional way. Stiglitz, Mazzucato, many others, academics are saying, listen, we have to redefine the way we manage our economies or our societies, which is based on 4 or 6 capitals. In the last couple of years, money was for free. I still remember that, the interest rates are still low, despite the fact that inflation is going up 7%. So the real interest rate is very low. So it's now time to borrow. Oil price, I still remember oil prices in 2020. Oil price was negative. Can you imagine that? The oil price right now is $100 a barrel. Completely berserk. Because we didn't pay for the climate effects of oil. We need to decarbonize the industry. But yet, nevertheless, the oil price was zero, even negative, because there was no storage capacity. We have 4 capitals which we need to recognize. Financial capital, still. Natural capital, which is becoming very expensive. The loss of biodiversity, climate change, all of those have costs to society. We need to redefine that. Social capital, you see it in societies, fragmenting, social cohesion, the divides have been bigger. I'm not talking about the Netherlands, I'm talking about the next frontier area is Africa or Latin America. I had in 2008, I woke up at Christmas in the middle of the night. And another advice I would like to leave with you, always make sure you have when you're sleeping, don't have your telephone there, that's for sure, but have a little piece of paper and a pen or pencil. Because sometimes you will wake up in the middle of the night and you have lucid idea. Those are the moments of lucidity which you should capitalize on and put them in the snippets, by the way. Christmas 2008, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was asking myself, having been in banking, why did I not foresee the crisis, the great financial crisis to occur? I was a proud, self-professed expert in risk management, and I missed it. How come? I said, well, bygones be bygones, no regrets. But let me think about what would be the next crisis. And I still remember I wrote down the word date. That was the only thing I put on my little paper, because I had that discipline to put a paper and a pen there. I woke up in the next morning and asked myself, what did I mean by date? Then I said, well, maybe that is the date for the next crisis. I remember, it was 2008. So then I was thinking, what could it be? And then I came to the realization that crises always manifest themselves on a Monday, 10 o'clock, 10:40. How come? Well, usually there is a summit of government officials or a summit or a meeting between banks and companies with a problem. Usually the weekends when the markets are closed are being used to try to solve the problem which suddenly was emerging on the week before. So if you look at the history of crisis, it often manifests themselves because of failed negotiations on a Monday. If you look at the history of crises, many crises in the financial markets happen in September, October, or November. When the leaves are falling. When we come back from holiday and we have a lot of plans for next year, or we know that we didn't realize the results in the current year. So often, and if you look at the history of crisis, it is September, October, November, there's something in the air which causes things to be sharper for everyone. If you look at the history of crises, there's a certain biblical logic that crises in the financial world occur every 7 years. So then I was thinking, all right, we had 2008, 2001, the dot-com crisis, Enron, 1994, the debt crisis in Asia, 1987, the Latin American crisis. So my date was Monday, 12 October 2015 for the next crisis. Question is, what would happen? Then I thought, looking around, where are the major fault lines in society? This was 2008. The fault lines are between the North and the South. Affluent Western Europe, poor Africa. Affluent North America, poor Latin America. The same is true in Asia. So, and coming back from the oil dependency, we were globalizing our supply chains. It's food, textiles. We import all those products, including energy, from the south. Well, in the world of transparency, social media, the poor people in Africa, I take it as a proxy for the rest of the developing world, know exactly what we pay for their products, and they know exactly what they're not getting. Which means they will wake up and say, listen, in 2015, you're not getting my products anymore. So the consequence of that, and some experts were saying, we will see a commodity supercycle. As a matter of fact, the decarbonization process we're going through right now means going away from fossil fuels, means that we have to go to minerals and metals, which are in the same countries. We have a huge natural resource issue. Mineral and metal security is going to be yet another
challenge we're going to face. Anyhow, the people in Africa don't know what they're not getting, so they're saying, you're not getting it from us unless we get the price. First oil shock in 1973. So either there is going to be a boycott of essential products available for us, because African countries are going to work together, say, you're not getting it, that's one. Second, you want our products? Fine. We will bring it and stay. Migration, economic migration. Or the third option is, we're not bringing the products, but we come. That's what happened in 2015. We have Shetland us, remember that? Migration, driven by climate, driven by, this year, by food, because Ukraine and Russia clearly have an impact on the food supply in the Middle East, and the fertilizer prices. So my prediction was, and I've been very public on that, in 12 October 2015, we will have one of those three scenarios, either a commodity problem like 1972, or, and that happened, massive economic migration, and we will see it again this year because of food, fertilizer, energy costs. So 2015. So I was about right. It happened in September, but the migration really stepped up. We had it was a conflict, of course, in Syria. It was climate change. It was a lot of the situation was one of the root causes of climate. The reality is that we will face another crisis unless we're going to change our fundamental way we look at economics. We are at an inflection point. The banks, I'm coming back, this is the macro picture, I'm now coming back to finance. I mentioned the banks already, the banks, also the pension funds and the insurance companies are really becoming focused on do no harm. Do no harm, meaning imposed by ethical values ourselves, but also by regulators. We want environmental, social issues and ethical issues to be dominant in our practice. But the problem is, net zero, we're not getting excited. You are not getting excited, neither am I getting excited about being judged upon I'm not doing any harm. That is not a driving of energy and ambition. Paul Polman wrote an interesting book just a year ago, and he called it Net Positive. And that completely resonated with me. And we have to think positively. We have to think we have to learn to think in opportunities again. One of the problems post-COVID is that if you look at companies, corporations right now, they are not investing. They have stock buybacks or higher dividend payouts to protect their stock price. The investment levels are too low. On top of that, governments, but also a lot of corporations, are highly leveraged. So in the European Union, the debt to GDP, if I may use that, in the Treaty of Maastricht was 60%, it's now 100%. We are mortgaging your future, because that debt eventually has to be repaid. We can only do that if we create opportunities, increase of productivity, increase of employment, increase of regenerating the thriving economy. We're not doing it right. We need a net positive outlook, because we need an SDG. Our economic context, we also need to create new income. We need to redefine value. I would recommend you to look into the books of Mariana Mazzucato. She is a professor in London at UCL. She's one of those, I think Julian or Caroline was asking, which books are you reading? Mariana Mazzucato is one of my how do you say it, heroines. Anyways, she is really very interesting to read because she is looking at the value of everything and the value of nothing. She's looking at redefining. She's in the space as we are in the Impact Economy Foundation. Okay, so what I'm saying is we are misdirecting our real economy. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of criticism that the current economy is too much financialized. We have to go to the real economy. We're misusing our natural resources. We're mispricing our assets. Externalities are not internalized. That's the essence of true price. People at the beginning of the supply chain, they deserve a living income. They deserve health insurance. They deserve a pension. We are not paying for that. We are abusing, exploiting their habitat. We have to pay for that. Stakeholder capitalism at the core. It's interesting that Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, in his annual CEO letter, he said 2 years ago in his letter, he's doing that every year, and again, BlackRock has total assets under management of 10 trillion. It's about 10% of global assets under management. So they're huge, they are the biggest. And they are very much in beta type products, in passive investing and in index investing. 2 years ago, he said in his annual letter, I'm an environmentalist, and I believe ESG is essential. Interesting enough, if you read his letter this year, he said, I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a capitalist. I'm a stakeholder capitalist. I recognize that capitalism is not just financial. I recognize capitalism and is more than investors. Capitalism is something which relates to the stakeholders. And stakeholders are customers, consumers, partners, staff. He hasn't said yet explicitly wider society as well. But read the letter of next year. So when Larry Fink, and the problem with Larry Fink is with BlackRock is that they are, the CEO often says wise things. The question is the organization going to work on it? And BlackRock is responsible. They are very much a driver of the markets because their asset allocation is important. If they say we're not really disinvesting from fossil fuels, that makes a difference. You haven't said it yet, but anyhow. And they also are active players in the shareholder meetings. He says stakeholder capitalism on the horse's mouth in the US says is at the core. We need to accelerate the scaling and the green transformation. We need to internalize all the externalities, go to true price. You can find all the details. And it's, I may say that those who are there in their late 20s, early 30s, the 50 young professionals, they're really at the frontier of development. And we have to adjust to the post-pandemic work. So ESG by the financial sector is dominated. The regulatory intervention is foremost on taxonomy and disclosure. The whole idea is that if companies start to disclose and provide more information to market participants, the investors, the consumers, people start making more informed decisions. And we need to have more innovation. And Dennis is going to address a number of good examples how in the financial sector you can innovate. And you have an income model. Not only a financial income model, but you create value for society and for the stakeholders. You will hear a lot of transition risks. We all have a view where we want to be. The question is, how do we get there? That's the tough one, not the perspective. A lot of, including myself, we all know where about we need to go. How do you get there? And how are governments or competitors How are we going to influence our trajectory for a better world? The only thing you can do is collective action. That's what I did in 2002 with the Equator Principles. If the leading practitioners say, we cannot continue like this, we do it together. Despite competition laws, we will do it nevertheless. Collective action. It's also for you. When you are looking at all the issues around you, you can ask yourself, how can I make a difference as a consumer? Well, collective action. If you go together and use the media, you can change the world with a number of people. It gives you courage, it gives you effectiveness. Double materiality. Maybe you've already heard about the issue. The traditional financial economy is looking at, I would say, the outside-in risks for a company or a financial institution. How is the world around me affecting my results? How am I dependent on the outside world? That's old school. That's the school of IFRS. That's the school of even ISB, which is now doing sustainability for IFRS. The new school is, next to outside in, financial impacts on me and dependencies, is the inside out dimension. I, as a company, and I, as a financial institution, have an impact on us, all of us, outside, on wider society, now and in the future. And I have to take responsibility. I have to take responsibility for wider society, but also in my entire value chain. I have a duty of care at the end of the value chain, as it's Unilever or Nestle or ABN Bank, Rabo. I have to look at my full value chain and see, where do I do things which I should not be doing? Where am I investing in a mine, invest Irion, in a way I should not do? Double materiality is a combination of outside in risks and dependencies in combination with an inside out impact you make on your stakeholders, including wider society. Greenwashing, there's too much of that. The verification by audit is extremely important. Benchmarking is important, but the problem right now is that benchmarking against the market, the typical beta index funding is you're hedging, you're dependent on a market which may collapse, and a market which has been based on wrong assumptions, because it's only the financial economy. It's only looking at the net present value of cash flows, but it doesn't address the issue that the cash flows have a negative effect on stakeholders or society. Interesting, the greenium, you see many companies, even governments, are issuing green bonds. There's a lot of greenwashing there as well, but anyhow, it's a popular asset class right now. So it has two benefits. One is it helps your reputation as a company, and often you can borrow at a lower cost because you're doing something well for society. I bet you 5 years from now, if you do not issue a bond which is green, you will get a discount. You will be charged for that. In other words, the premium right now is that you get a benefit if the bond is green. 5 years from now, if the bond is not green, you pay extra. Different mindset, because greening is the name of the game. So the whole greenium should disappear. Stakeholder engagement is extremely important. The question is, how do you do that? You see a lot of companies who are engaging in the annual reports on the materiality of their interventions. Stakeholder engagement is something I would recommend you to look at that, because it goes back to stakeholder capitalism. And disclosure and independent assurance is increasingly important, because there's too much greenwashing, there's too much white noise, and we need to have auditors or independent verifiers to assure us that I'm doing the right thing, that my promises are real. All right, last appeal to you. I mentioned the SDGs. They started in 2015. We're halfway. We're lagging behind. But that's okay. You can think, well, it was a new phenomenon in 2015. You have the typical hockey stick development. First, everyone needs to buy in, and then suddenly people start moving. So but now the next 8 years is implementation, execution. That will happen, and Dennis and I, Dennis no doubt will refer to that. Dennis is one of the in SDG the Netherlands, one of the SDG alliance coordinators for SDG 16. You will no doubt mention that, which I think is at the core. But I know for sure that you know what SDG 16, and we're not going to test that, but you know for sure what SDG 16 is. But we have to think, or rather, you have to think, what comes next. 2015, the SDGs was very much top down. It was the United Nations together with business, NGOs, coming together, and in 2000, after, I mean, I was there in 2012. It took us 3 years to come to the SDGs in 2015. And so you have those 17 goals and the targets and the indicators. But that's a top-down process. What we need now, as from, I would say, next year, 2023, a top-down coordination, but very much a bottom-up movement that we have to redefine the future for the next 25 years. That's where your comment plays. That's why sometimes crises are helpful, because they make us aware that things are not going right, that there's a lot of dead wood there, that there are a lot of misunderstandings, that we realize that global issues like public health, COVID-19, climate, also biodiversity, are global issues which we cannot resolve here in Rotterdam. We need to do that together. So my hope is that going through 2022, possibly with another debt crisis for developing countries, which make things worse later this year, export flows are affected, dollar loans at low interest rates become very expensive, there will be defaults. At 2023, when there will be the summit of the future convened, already announced by the United Nations, will provide the seeds for a next generation SDG type convention. Say, we're going to do things, we need to do things differently. Same effect which Paris had, Kyoto in 1997, but Paris in particular, SDGs post 2030 are key. And you are young professionals to be. You should be the drivers. Go to the website 2100.nl. That's a group of young professionals. It's part of the Impact Economy Foundation, who say we will have our children in the year 2100. We want to be, that's our purpose. We want, as young professionals, we want to be a board member. So what they are doing is, they're being trained to be a member of a supervisory board. And they're going to seek support to become, as someone who's 30 years old, to become the member of the supervisory board of a company. Because many boards have, at worst, people like me in the supervisory board, at best, people like Dennis in the supervisory board. But there is an intergenerational issue here. I call it intergenerational equity. You don't want to be faced with the legacy which I have left after 25 years of creating the wrong business, oil and money. So step up to the plate. think of the values and the principles. Think of the world which you want to be a new member of a board, business or a government or an NGO or whatever, or an academic. What is the world in 2050 I would like to see? And we have a pretty rough perspective what it should be. More inclusive, more nature respecting, more socially, more higher ethical values. How are we going to contribute to that? Otherwise, we meet again 25 years from now. We have every intention to be there. It's and you're looking back to the first 25 years of your career, you come to the conclusion, I missed the point. I didn't read the signs on the wall, or I saw the signs on the wall, but I don't know what to do because it was just me. So my appeal to you is, that's why I'm really happy that you're back in class to meet, to smell, to have a cup of coffee, or worse, to say, what can we do? Because we can shape, you can shape your future. And I'm very interested 25 years from now when you're here and I'm sitting there with my stick and you're probably old, to say, well, that's what we did. Thank you very much.
Should we do a short period of questions? I know we're a bit late and we started late as well, so maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
Go ahead.
Anyone has a question? I have a few, but I'm the one to start.
Well, yeah, I was just curious. In one point of the presentation, you were talking about changing the goal of GDP growth to have for other types of capital goods, and you started naming some of them, but I don't think you named the 4. I think you said environmental, natural resources, social, yes, and
Human.
human.
That's the 4th.
And how social and human?
If you want to see how that works in practice, my advice to you, I mean, it's another hour to discuss that in the details, but whether it's working from home, studying from home, you can do it also at your own time. Go to the annual report of ABN Bank, which is the most advanced, or the network company Allianz in the Netherlands. They have basically applied the impact weighted accounts methodology which we are developing together with Harvard Business School. And not only that, but also it has been verified by an auditor. So it's maturing. And what you see there, and it is complicated, that's why I need another hour to explain, which I will not, but have a look, because what it does is, it is looking at, it's a multi-dimensional matrix. You're talking about what are the 4 capitals, financial, natural, social, human. What are the SDG, what are the ESG standards which are critical to me, so which is the baseline, the do no harm baseline. So that usually is the cost you incur on society. The next dimension is look at the SDGs. What is my contribution to my stakeholders? And then 4th dimension, you identify your stakeholders. You have the staff, you have your customers, you have your suppliers, and your society. So this 4-dimensional matrix has been used by both companies. And if you go to that, you can see how complicated it is. But we can, as we say in the tax world, we cannot make it simpler. One important thing is we are not netting human rights against environmental damage. We cannot net that because these are different issues. What you do in this type of reporting is make visible. And then you explain and you are accountable for the choices you make. So then we can argue whether you agree or not. Have a look at those annual reports, ABN AMRO Bank and Alliander. But there are other companies, so that DBS is active in this space. UBS is looking at it. So it is, particularly the financial sector is stepping up, because that's my theme here. The financial sector has a stewardship role. I was a steward in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s and the 80s for earning money. I was a steward. The wrong steward, or the right steward at the wrong time, or whatever you call it. The financial sector has the ability, and Dennis no doubt will emphasize it, the financial sector has an opportunity and a duty to be the steward to create that world in which we want to live, you want to live. And I want to observe from there 25 years from now.
I have one bit complicated question, but if we say that according to Rob Mulder's theory, companies can transition from inactive state to reactive, attentive one to more active, and the last stage would be the proactive one. Let's say that currently banks have to start implementing all these European Action Plan regulations that are coming this year and the next 2 years, let's say. What do you think, how do you think they can go from a reactive stage, which they are already forced to be, to a more active and proactive? Like, what would be the steps for, let's say, a bank in Eastern Europe, which till now didn't have to think about that and doesn't have even CSR report?
It's like the other question. It's excellent, and I'm happy that you raised it, because it's part of our conversation and debate and question. Let me give you two sides of the answer. 2002, that's why I came with my example of my own experience in 2002. I had a big problem because I wanted to do the right thing, but the competition was not. That's why I was emphasizing collective action for you personally, but also in an organization. So the financial sector itself should say, listen, it cannot be that we are becoming a compliancy factory. We need to create value as financial institutions in the real economy for real people. So banks, pension funds should come together and say we have to improve our income model. And they have to do it with support from supervisors, because the ones who are putting the screws on them right now should also be acutely aware that creating a defensive financial sector is not in the long-term interest of all of us. So it requires public advocacy from CEOs of financial institutions, but also the likes of a good friend of mine, Frank Alderson, in the board of ECB, who is very much driving the climate agenda and the biodiversity agenda and the human rights agenda, to say, all right, this movement is on climate biodiversity is taking place. Now we have to think how we can create an environment in which you as financial institutions are going to be an active, proactive steward. Frank Alderson came 2 weeks ago as an angry official from Frankfurt to say the banks are not doing enough on climate. He may be right, but when I see him next time, I say, Frank, can you please balance your message? Can you please also, because you matter, the ECB matters for European banks, can you also say, listen, your income sustainability needs to be redefined as well. It's not just heat maps and stress tests and worst case scenarios, which is very much, my wife is struggling with all of those. I mean, how do you deal with them? And it creates a culture which is not good to have. So, and the second part of it is you, I'm appealing also over your head, you as young generation, you need to be much more vocal. Say, listen, I don't know how many of you wants to work with Shell. Well, yeah. No, I can understand that. I can see countercyclically, I may want to work with Shell because I know the company is going to change. But maybe you say, well, I don't want to do that. You don't want to work in the financial sector, and that's the existential issue. You don't want to work in a bank or a pension fund or an insurance company. That you or someone else said, no. This is financialization of the economy. This is speculation. This is playing the markets. I don't want to do that. There's an existential issue for them that they don't get the talent they need. So you can play if you as a group here or here at university say, listen, we have a problem. We have a problem. We are now on the verge of entering the labor market. What am I going to do, or what I'm not going to do? There's a scarcity of talent. It's the best moment after a crisis to get into the buying low, selling high, which means that you can be very selective in what you're going to do and be vocal about it. Tell companies why you're not joining collectively. So it's complicated, but you have much more power than you think you have collectively.
There is one really nice alliance. It's called Global Alliance on Banking Values, and it's actually focused on delivering the triple bottom line concept into reality, and it's interesting. I'm not really sure. I think Trios is banking the Netherlands.
Trios is very much involved in that. And I think a number of banks. It's a very good initiative. The question is, and I admire them, and they're doing it already many years. It's only small financial institutions. So the question is, as we say, can the alliance look in a pak boven slaan? Dutch will understand what I'm saying. Can you make a serious impact? So if you the challenge for the alliance is, can I become mainstream? Because they are in a niche. Can the systemic banks make a difference? So Rabobank is working with full price now on the true value of food. Rabobank is a systems player. So you can go to an organization, to three or so on, but can you really make a difference? And I would say, have the courage, not to convince Trios because they're there already, but to convince the Rabos, the INGs, the BlackRocks, to say your self-interest and my interest are the same, long-term value creation through blended finance, and then it will pay more attention to that.
We will have the chief economist at Trios on Friday. Maybe we can ask him the question.
There's one question from people online. They ask, how important is market regulation in agrarian finance? Should the government intervene more forcefully than it has been?
Say it again.
Should the government intervene more forcefully than it has been?
The right government always should. The question is, dealing with the government, are they politically or politically independent enough to be a leader? And I think governments have the same problem as I would say even the BlackRocks. Their portfolio and their own stakeholders are very much also representatives of incumbents, and governments even more. BlackRock is a universal investment company, so that means that they are everywhere, on the right side and the wrong side. Governments typically are more myopic. There are very few governments whom you can a complement for the long-term vision, because it's the next elections, and it is the political. So that's why I emphasized, and Dennis no doubt will illustrate that. Governments are partners in blended value creation structures and blended finance, but the governments are not the leaders. The leaders are us. Progressive companies who can move markets. So let's not overemphasize the government. One comment on this, I'm very impressed with what's happening from Brussels, more so than what's happening from The Hague. I think what Timmermans is doing and his colleagues, and also Diederik Samson, I think they are really putting the bear by the cow by the horns, the bull by the horns, so to speak, coming back to bulls and bears and the green spots. But we are the leaders. You are the leaders to be, not the government. They should help us a little bit. They should become a little bit more catalytic, but don't have too high expectations.
I think we'll have to stop it here. Thank you very much. Maybe we can